So, hi everybody. I'm JJ. Yes, I really do have that email address, as I said a minute ago. I'm a developer advocate for the IBM Cloud for IKS, which is the IBM Kubernetes service. You can reach me through Twitter, email, or I even set up WeChat because it's the first time I've ever been in China, and it was kind of cool. So, if you have any questions or thoughts or whatever. A lot of this talk is basically things I've learned over the last 10 years of doing open source projects. I started about back in 2001 or so, or a little bit earlier, I guess, where I was being part of a small open source project called Crux Linux, crux.nu. I spent some time going through, eventually got into the OpenStack world. I'm not going to rag on OpenStack too much, but there were some really interesting lessons learned there. And it's neat to see in the Kubernetes ecosystem how they've taken those lessons learned and appropriated them to make sure they're successful. And I'm going to just kind of keep going through there. So first thing I want to talk about, this isn't a tools talk. This is more of a cultural talk. There are successful ways of using tools to help get success for your open source projects. Git, no joke, is a great way. And also with the bringing up of GitHub, being able to have a true social center point of being able to get people to add to open source projects easier, things can happen very quickly. But believe it or not, I actually really enjoyed Garrett in the OpenStack world, which if you don't know, Garrett is a way to do code reviews, and it was very successful. But the most important thing you need to think about when you start first going into into a project is that you need to scope it. And back in the days of when I first started back in 2001 or so, it was really easy to scope a open source project because you would have something like just let's get Linux out there. We need versions of Linux. You had all the major ones, but there was this one specific one, like I said, called crux.nu, where we used the BSD style ports tree where everything was written in bash. So who all likes bash? Yeah, we got a couple? Got a couple? So it was easy to use, it was really easy to bring in. So instead of you having to deal with all the stuff around Red Hat at the time, or CentOS was just starting up, you would just have like your init scripts being bash scripts. You'd be able to do make files. You build everything from source. And you would actually be able to have full control over your machine. It's said that Gentoo actually came out of the Crux original tree, if you look through all that process. And it's important to look at the grand scope of your project, because you will start appropriating other things. Scope creep is a real thing that causes real problems. And I'm so sorry, my watch keeps buzzing because I get notifications. I should have turned those off. My bad. Anyway, so let's take one of the negative sides of scoping your project. Let's go back to OpenStack. OpenStack had a really big problem where they wanted to bring in the whole world. They wanted to say that this is going to be the open source cloud to make things happen. They created this thing called the Big Tent, which allowed for anyone to start an OpenStack project and get it put into it to say it was part of OpenStack. Believe it or not, I actually have 3 of them to my name. I actually do have 3 OpenStack projects to my name. First is the OpenStack Chef project, because I was a Chef employee and I was running Chef at the time, and I'll talk about that in a minute. One called OS Ops. And then in Austin for the OpenStack Summit, it took me only 15 minutes to start an OpenStack project and get it actually submitted to the thing. But I'll keep talking about scoping here in a second. But to specifically focus on personally backed projects, and when you're scoping your project, you need to, it's a good way of saying it, you need to, when you are scoping your project and it's personally backed, you can sit down and really truly build it to what it wants. Now, if you look at what Linus did with the Linux kernel, and then you look at something you want to do, like a little Go app or something like that, to go do something, they're 2 totally different ecosystems, right? But they come from the same idea that it was a personal project, a personal drive to get something done. You had your own itch to scratch, right? You had this problem, you needed to get it done. The beauty of personally backed, scoped project is that you have true control over it. Unfortunately, those are few and far between to be truly successful. Nowadays, open source projects are usually a collaboration of multiple companies, multiple people to come together. Very rarely do you ever see one person truly get a project that companies we use in the major force. Don't get me wrong, open source projects can have, or you can have an open source project of like some bash scripts or something like that, and that's not the scope that I'm talking about. I'm saying like a full application. It's really important to focus what you want to get done and scratch your own itch. But more importantly, what we've all been discovering lately is, whoops, wrong way. We have corporate-backed open source projects. And this is a really important distinction, because with corporate-backed, you actually have people truly sitting down and working on the projects. You still have people like, hell, I work at IBM, right? And I'm paid to work on open source projects because the things that I get to work on help benefit IBM to be successful. It's important. It's one of those things that just kind of comes together, where with a corporate-backed open source project, you bring in a larger community, you bring in skills and people from all over the world to be able to be successful. You do need to scope it again, though, because it's no longer personally scoped, and you can say, no, we're not going to do RabbitMQ or no messaging bus or something like that. We're going to focus on this. You can't just change the boat very quickly. So, oops, I keep hitting the wrong button. So when you're scoping your project, and you're moving into the next step of what you're trying to think about, you need to think about empathy and your audience, of who's actually going to use your project, who's going to wake up every morning and use that bit of software that you've put together to be successful. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there who have this lack of term, or what's the word I'm looking for? Unfortunately, there are people out there who create a firewall between their project and their audience. You need to be inclusive, you need to bring people in, you need to be able to convince people that your project's good, but at the same time, you need to be able to succeed in, okay, long story short, don't be a dick, right? I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of the idioms that unfortunately, they don't get translated very well, and I'm trying to change the words around, but it's really important not to be a dick in start of open source. And I'm gonna start using the idioms to make my conversation a little bit easier, because I'm getting confused. Because, once again, this is open source, you're trying to build a community, you're trying to bring things together, you're trying to get something to make your lives better. And if you don't spend the time and effort to work and reach out to your community who uses your project, you're not going to be successful. You cannot have an open source project where it's just you sitting in the corner writing the things. So, yes, and also, READMEs are important. Be sure to write a good README to be able to make sure that people come together and see what the project is about. There's many different options out there, and READMEs are extremely important. Okay, let's talk about some celebrations. Now, this is actually not, this is going to take a little bit of a weird turn, but there's a really big push now to start celebrating specific people who do awesome things inside of different open source projects. There are things, I'm going to pick on Chef Software real quick, because I used to work for them. They had this concept called an awesome chef. And it was a celebration of somebody who's gone above and beyond for the community, and they would give them a really nice backpack and like a really nice hoodie. If you're thinking of your companies, you might have think of the same ones out there. And the idea was to celebrate, to say thank you for this. And that was amazing when it first started. It really is. But unfortunately, over time, celebrating specific individuals, part of those communities, you start building basically a caste system. You celebrate these specific humans who've gone above and beyond that all of a sudden become celebrities in these little open source projects. And that's a problem, in my opinion. Because all of a sudden you see them walk up and down a hallway at a conference center or something like that, and you don't know if you can talk to them or not as humans. I mean, honestly, who's ever actually walked, or maybe you do know, maybe you don't, but if you know Kelsey Hightower, how many people have actually walked up to him and shook his hand? I, to this day, have never been able to bring myself to do it. And that's a perfect example of that type of celebrity that happens with these celebrations. I'm not saying that we shouldn't celebrate. I'm just saying that we need to find, there needs to be an even balance and to be able to be successful with these types of things. And not create this aura of a celebrity. Okay, let's talk about some defeats. I'm going to pick on OpenStack again. So I actually got to be, going back to the celebrations, which I was supposed to mention a second ago, but I actually got to be awarded one of the very first OpenStack community awards, which is exactly the exact opposite of what I was just saying, where we should do that. But I realized after the fact, and this is where this came from, is that I was being highlighted as a high member of the OpenStack order, if you will. In my mind, that was a defeat. In my mind, it showed this aspect of negativity that wasn't great. We are trying to build a community, we're trying to build a project, we're trying to be successful. We need to be able to create an aura of inclusivity, I can't speak, and be able to have success around it. Unfortunately, when you start bringing in, going back to OpenStack, when you start bringing in too many things, like I said about the big tent earlier, there's this aspect of, what's a good word for it? Way too many things coming in. I'm trying to make the sense, again, I'm not using my idioms, so I'm not getting across what I'm trying to say. Anyway, long story short, an open source project can be defeated by the wrong people being involved, the wrong scope of what's going on, and also when you start trying to eat too much, right? If you're trying to bring too many things in, an open source project can, oops, someone's trying to get in. An open source project can fail because of that. So be wary of the scope of the project, why I started at the scope, because if you bring too many things in, you try to boil the ocean. Hopefully that idiom gets across well. Let's talk about some successful traits of open source projects now. So things that I've seen actually happen that are successful. First, as I was saying about a good README, a way for people to come in and actually use your open source project successfully at the very, very, very beginning. One of the best examples I've ever seen is, in my opinion, a Vagrant file. Does everyone know what Vagrant is? Yes? Okay. So there was an open source project I saw that they said, pull down this Vagrant file, do a Vagrant up, and it would build up the whole project it's a Vagrant box on your actual laptop. So it would pull the code down in from GitHub, it would compile it for you, and all of a sudden you had a sandboxed version of that software on a Vagrant box, so it's not messing up your machine. So if you realize if you need to use it, you don't have to worry about breaking your own laptop or your own computer. It was an unbelievably powerful way of doing it, and it was very secure. It was great. Another thing is, and one of the things I really truly loved about the OpenStack community, and believe it or not, a successful trait, is that they forced weekly meetings. They made sure that the people that were involved actually came together and worked together. And I believed at the time, not Slack, but it was IRC, we were able to get on IRC, allow for people who aren't native English speakers to be able to write out what they wanted to say, so it was very clear and the communication was very clear. So it's not like getting on a Zoom or a video conference. It's like getting on actual text, so people actually had exactly what you meant to say was said right then and there. I still remember this one gentleman from the OpenStack chef project. His name was Mars. I think his real name was Wei Chen, and I was really hoping to meet him here. It didn't happen though. He actually worked at IBM at the time. And I built a friendship off of with him because we were able to talk through text and really be very clear about what we were doing. We were able to get the projects done. He eventually became a very high-ranking member of our project for the open source, or for OpenStack Chef. Same as another friend of mine from Germany. His name was Jan. I built a friendship through him through IRC of the works we were doing. Another very successful point of an open source project is not only the communication, not only the first day touching, the documentation is extremely important, and also reachability. And it's a different word, it's a weird word to say, but the ability to actually have people show up instead of just at that meeting, but when they're working on our projects, that they are reachable. They're actually humans you can come talk to. It's a very important portion of it. Now let's see if I hit the right button this time. No, I hit the wrong button. So when you start building your project up more, you start having to deal with trust issues. So if you're talking about your personally backed project, and you're talking about your corporate backed project, there's still this intersection on that Venn diagram of trust. As your project grows and as you get more people involved, which is the ultimate goal because it's open source, you need to start letting go of the reins. You need to start to trust your people who are working with you on your project to be successful. Unfortunately, there's a lot of humans out there don't really like the idea of trust. They can't, because it's their baby, it's their project. They've spent all their time and effort and love on it, and it causes this level of uncertainty. I truly believe this is the largest mountain for most people to climb, especially if you're a leader inside the project or if it's your project alone. Hello. And it brings in this. It's the hardest mountain to climb. It's also a maturity thing, in my opinion. As the project has become more and more mature, there's this beauty of trust that can happen between the people who actually put the software out and that's actually changed over time. Because it is a living being, right? As the code becomes scattered, there's different portions. Someone can take an ownership of a specific column of specific things inside of a code tree or whatever, and you trust that those persons are going to do the right things. And I'm not going to hit the button anymore. I'm just going to use my left mouse. There we go. Going back to the READMEs from originally, the idea of having a clear vision about the project and to be successful is extremely important. Have a scoping paragraph in your README. Chef eventually got to doing this with their cookbooks. So there's a lot of open source cookbooks at Chef out there. And unfortunately, people started building cookbooks that would do everything. They would have some app that would be like, I deploy my app, and it turns out it brings in RabbitMQ, Postgres, and Tomcat for some crazy-ass reason. Modularity and clarity became so important at Chef. So we actually started deciding that every single top of every single README had a scope of this is exactly what this cookbook does nothing more, nothing less. And people just really want to come in this door. It's very, very important. And every single project, in my opinion, again, it needs this clarity, needs that scope line. Please, if you have a time, look up online the Chef cookbooks. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So, something broke. On it, oh, I have, so, okay. So, over time, as you start becoming more successful, you're not going to be running your project forever. Let's just be honest. You're going to move on. You're going to get a new job. You're going to find a new passion. You need a plan to move on. You need people, back to the trust, that you can hand this off to be successful. You need to be able to sit down and realize you can let go of the reins and give your lieutenants or whoever you've worked with on your project, or hell, you might as well just put in the attic and forget about it, because who knows, people might not use it anymore. Though I'll be honest, there are a lot of projects out there that people don't think are being used. They're used quite a bit. So it's always important to have a plan to move on, or find someone who can take ownership of it and run forward. Eventually, thinking about this in the future instead of when you actually decide to leave is more important, so you can come together with the right people to be involved. Does that make sense? Okay. And I'm gonna end on this very, very simple question. Is it even worth it in the long run, doing all this open source work? Because there's a lot of hassle. There's a lot of things you've got to think about, especially if you're trying to be successful in this world. Like with most computers, it depends. Like it really does. There are certain times where a closed source application where you only do inside of your corporation that you never release to the rest of the world might actually be a much better idea than open sourcing it. You really do need to think about all of the things around it and the community building that is required to be successful. Luckily, there are people out there, they are usually known as developer advocates now, or DevRel, or things like that, who specialize in building communities for projects. There are people who know how to talk to the different demographics and the different humans that are required to be successful and can corral them. There's an idiom, you've got to herd cats, right? You got to keep cats all together. There are people out there who specialize that, and yes, they're successful, and I consider myself one of them. And yes, I do think it is, in general, worth the hassle, but again, it really does depend. So those are all my kind of high points of what is going on, and I wanted to open up and have, if anyone had any questions or thoughts, again, if you don't want to ask here in this audience, these are my contacts. Please, I genuinely want to continue this conversation. I've had a lot of I've had some great successes. I've had some really bad defeats. Hell, if you go to my GitHub page, which is just JJ Asghar 2, you'll notice I have a bunch of code out there that's really, really stale also. So I know how to walk away from a project if I need to. So thoughts, questions? Everything's open. I don't really mind. Or it is quite warm in this room. Just saying. Yes? Nothing? Yes, please.
At the beginning of the projects initiated in the upstream, and do you have any suggestions on how to make your projects be aware of a lot of people? Because especially for some engineer, especially who initiate a project, some of them are not very good at to give such a presentation in some conference. So do you have any suggestions on that?
So your question is how do you recruit more people into your project? Yeah. Is that the question? So that is a very hard thing to do, because you need to find the right people to be really involved and be able to come together to build that community. Believe it or not, there are a lot of engineers out there who have passion for very specific things. And just like personality traits, there are people who really, truly love databases. There are people who truly love messaging queues, right? What you need to do is, if you have your project and you're trying to find people to be involved in, you move yourself into one of those groups that are what you're looking for, and try to recruit people talking about the cool idea you have. And with that, eventually, you'll get that, you'll see people come along to your project to be successful. It requires a lot of effort on your part, because you're evangelizing. You are going out to tell your story to get people to be involved. It's like finding someone for your company. It takes time to really, really whittle someone down to come join you, right? Because we are successful engineers. I mean, you're at a Kubernetes conference. You obviously are the cutting edge of technology, right? People want us to work for them. unfortunately, we also get to choose where we want to fit into, normally. Did I answer your question? Okay. Any other questions, thoughts? Thank you.